So before starting with the next talk, with the introduction of the next talk, I would like to ask one question. Like, have you done open source contributions before? Shoot on the chats, or you can maybe talk from the offices. Have you done open source contribution before? Okay, so we're having no, we're having yes. Okay, little bit. Okay, great. So I myself also have always been intrigued about the idea of working on the open source projects, and we have got lots of answers. Yes. So for me, it's like whenever I think about an open source contribution, it's always Manoj Kumar that comes to my mind. So yes. Before further ado, let's introduce our next talk, that is contributing to open source. It's not that scary, by none other than Manoj Kumar. A very warm welcome, Manoj. I hope you're doing fine. Yes, we have Manoj on video as well. Thank you.
Hello.
So,
hi, everyone.
Hey, Manoj, it's good to see you after so long. Yeah.
Likewise.
So, introducing Manoj quickly. So, Manoj is a VP Developer Relations at LambdaTest. He's an open source enthusiast who contributes to several repositories like Selenium, Appium, etc. We all must be knowing that, right? Manoj is also a member of the Project Leadership Committee for Selenium and an international conference speaker who loves sharing his knowledge to the community. Formerly, Manoj was a principal consultant who has played multiple roles at ThoughtWorks. He loves exploring the software development lifecycle in its entirety and is particularly passionate about solving problems in the QA and the DevOps space. That's about him, and a little about his talk about contributing to open source. It's not that scary. Take the leap. So contributing to open source may be intimidating as it might seem, hard to get started, but it really isn't. It could be as simple as handpicking a project you don't know a lot about and just contributing to it. No contribution is small, right? Every little bit counts as it ultimately improves the project. Being involved in open source can help your career and get you more opportunities. Not only will you learn more, but you will also get to network with people from various walks of life. I won't say much about it now, and over to you, Manoj.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Canary. So good to be here. Yeah, I mean, it's been 6 months, I think. Getting back on vodQA with ThoughtWorks is always great. And so good to see so many familiar faces. So I have a monitor here so I can actually see you all. So if I keep seeing this side, yeah, that's what I'm doing, just to see you all, what your reactions are. Sorry, unfortunately, I couldn't make it to the Chennai office due to the overwhelming rains. Not a bit about the rains, but it's so good to have in Chennai. So, but yeah, so good to be here online. Also good to see so many veterans from ThoughtWorks like Anand, Narayan, a lot of people here. So yeah, hi to everyone. And thanks for the kind introduction, Kinnari. You actually taken down a couple of my questions and a couple of my slides as well. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, let's get started with no further ado. So today's talk is going to be all about contributing to open source, right? So we have been hearing this term like open source for a very long time. And one of the things that has been, inspiration for me about ThoughtWorks, also one of the reasons why I joined ThoughtWorks earlier, when I looked at the career page, probably in 2011, 10s, around that time, I think there used to be one title or a banner at the top of the thing, right? So it was actually saying, stop careering, start contributing. That was like hitting nail in my head saying, okay, which means I shouldn't be looking out to career. So if you start to contribute to open source, which means you'll actually end up getting job like companies like ThoughtWorks, and which is eventually I ended up getting like that a couple of years down the line. So open source is not new to ThoughtWorks, ThoughtWorkers, but still there are a lot of people who haven't started their journey. And this talk for next 30-35 minutes is going to be all about my journey, a little bit of my journey, and then some of the things that I've faced when I contributed to open source, which I'm mostly sure most of you all can relate to it. And so yeah, let's begin the journey, and I hope you all will like it. First things first, before we wanted to start about open source, I wanted to get a common ground about what is open source, right? So just to give you a brief introduction, so open source, we all do agile delivery, shift left, shift right, DevOps, and all of that, right? So open source is a way of development where, nothing gets counted in terms of whether what sort of methodology you're doing, or even metrics, right? So it's a little bit intimidating about when we talk about metrics. I mean, Anand has given a wonderful talk about it. But open source is a place where, you are not measured against metrics. You're not it's not a place where you looked at, how you've been coding and a lot of other stuff, right? So a software where you develop collaboratively and mostly with the community support, right? Where you can, the source code is open, where you're allowed to modify, you're allowed to make changes, fix issues, and it's free to use and distribute. I've seen people who have, tweaked Selenium code base and have made, a billion-dollar company out of it. And there are a lot of, ways of doing that. And open source is such a good place to, contribute and, find yourself more, more about it. That's how I see. So it's more like if I look into the mirror, I see myself and I talk to, my inner myself. And that's how I see open source, where I start contributing and write code in front of people. That's where a lot of things, happens. And people always think about open source as just code, right? So I just wanted to say open source is not dealing with code. It's all about dealing with people, right? It's always hard, right? I mean, dealing with code is, in my opinion, is a lot easier than, dealing with people, right? You can't make everyone happy. You can't understand what their perspective is. It's always hard, right? So I don't know, we always have a different opinion about our managers, but then people who are managing people are always the toughest jobs. And open source is again one of that, where you usually need to have that common ground where you welcome new contributions, welcoming suggestions, and finding the middle ground and peace, and working between different people with different time zones, and also dealing with people who take it for granted, and also embracing the abuse, right? So, and there is a lot of things that happens within open source community. And it's always hard when you think of it as well. It's not only about code, it's all about people and all the nuances and all the the dynamics and the characteristics that are associated with people. It's still there. I mean, to make it more regional and contextual, I think for Indians, it shouldn't be a problem, because we deal with people everywhere we go, because we are more than 1 billion people. And right from traffic, to wherever we go, it's all people, and we, try to gel with them. And I think given that context, open source will not be new to you all. So I think you should, take that first step in contributing to open source. But also, one thing that you should think about when you contribute, or when you think about contributing to open source, is about that you actually be starting to be more vulnerable, right? So open source is dealing with vulnerability, where what I mean by that is you're actually putting yourself in many different shoes, and you should be the guy who's willing to take feedback. You should be willing to understand their perspective. There is a wonderful talk given by Eileen. You can check it on YouTube about the different vulnerabilities that typically people face when dealing with open source. So that's a fantastic talk. You should go and listen in YouTube. I can share the link offline in the chat after my talk is over. So it's like that, right? So I have been very intimidated by contributing to open source. I've been thinking, oh, it's very hard, I can't do. And so this was in my early stage of career. That's I was thinking about not knowing what is open source at all. So I've been telling this at many forums, wherever people ask me, what is, what was your first contribution? I always proudly used to say, yeah, I contributed to documentation, and that's my first step. Well, but you don't know what all I went through before I started doing that. And that's where the vulnerability is. So that first step always really matters. And after that, the journey will be very easy. And my first contribution has been documentation in Selenium project. But after that, I've started contributing code. But there was a huge gap between me started contributing to documentation, and then I started contributing to code. So the time gap was almost like 2-3 years, I would say, because I always felt like I was not ready. People will, start judging my code. There's a lot of stuff, goes through, and I wasn't ready, honestly. And after I went through that step, I was like, oh, I wasted 2-3 years, and I should have, started this earlier, right? So talking about my open source journey and to where I am right now, I've done, as Kennedy mentioned, thank you so much again. I've been contributing to a lot of open source projects, and I have my own projects in Kubernetes, Docker, getting the observability tracing metrics from Selenium, a lot of this. So from a guy who started from there to where I am right now in contributing and open sourcing my own solutions, a lot has went through, right? If I ought to just give you what happened between those 2-3 years, right? So this is how exactly I used to be. Don't be this guy, right? So if you see what the screenshot says, it's all about me asking code review on an email, right? How hard that can be. That's exactly what I've been doing. Not very,
Hey, Manoj,
not very much
just
comfortable.
one thing.
Yeah.
You said that you are referring to a screenshot. Are you sharing your screen?
Yes, not yet.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I think something has stopped in between.
Yeah, because you referred to a screenshot, so I thought that, okay, I think the screen is getting shared.
Okay, 1 second. Thank you.
Manoj, I think
No,
you have had your screen still lit, like from the beginning.
Yes, let me. Thank you. You figured out it was not until end of the talk.
I thought that you must be speaking and then you'll be sharing the screen later, but yeah, no worries.
No,
You can go
it's
ahead
good.
now.
I take it as a advantage. Like I always dreamed of giving a talk without the slides. So probably if you have got until now, that's great. Let me go back a couple of slides. Hopefully it's visible now. All right. So this is
It's
how I
not
started
yet.
with.
I can't see it. Can anyone else see the screen? Now it's up. Yes. Now it's up.
Cool. Now it's visible. All right, just give me a minute. I just rearrange my monitor. Okay, you see the slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So hopefully you would have gotten the definition of open source when I started. I think that is what the slide talks about, where it's a software that's developed collaboratively and with the community effort. And then I moved on and started showing all about dealing with, open source is all about dealing with code, and it's not with code people. And then open source is dealing with vulnerability, and this is where actually I started. So as I was saying, it could be intimidating, but it took me a lot of time to start with that code contribution. And this is the screenshot that I was saying, and I think we realized the screen was not shared. But yeah, I just wanted to be, don't be this guy. And I've been doing this. When I started, I was so shy. I was not confident on my coding skills, and this is what I was doing. So the person who's reviewing the code is Jason Leba. He was actually the lead on JavaScript bindings for Selenium WebDriver. So I started contributing on Selenium WebDriver JavaScript, and this is what I've been doing, right? So this is where I used to be when I was getting my first steps. It's like, okay, people will start judging my code, and I shouldn't be doing that. Maybe I should see, if someone can help me offline, who can, then I can, because I was at a point, I was like a person who will not handle the rejection, right? Okay, I raised my first pull request and I wanted to damn straight get it right. If I'm not, then I'm not too confident, which will actually hinder my confidence down the line. So which led me to do this route of things. And then later I realized this is not how it should be. But I just wanted to take a moment and thank Jason, who has been so patient and who helped me get through that, email review. But still, I'm suggesting don't go by that route. It's still a bad way. Now, if I, look back, it's as good as how you laugh when you look at the code that you've written 10 years back, right? And that's what I've been feeling as well. So then why I started contributing, right? So that's the $1 million question. Like, of course, we have been busy with our day job, we have families. So that's one of the questions that people always ask. Starting to, if you're a contributor to open source, okay, which means you don't have a life. That's the immediate reflection that people will say when if you're an open source contributor. Well, I had my own life, but then the reason why I started contributing to any open source project was basically being selfish enough to scratch my own itch, where I had a problem which I wanted to solve at my workplace, and I started to look around, and there was no solutions. And Stack Overflow, Selenium users group, nothing really helped me out. And then I decided. Then I was looking. Fortunately, I got to know there is an IRC channel, which is, if you don't know what is IRC, it's like the Slack, but a decade ago or two decades ago, and I joined the group of people where, the likes of Jason, Simon, all of these people were hanging around and discussing a lot of things about, what to do in the next version of Selenium or how this piece of code works. So they would start the conversation as if, you and I are sitting next to each other and having a coffee. And then it's like, hey, this line of code, this is what happens. So as a newbie, first baby steps getting in there, it was so intimidating. I was like, what the heck they are talking about? I don't have a clue on what this happens. So what if they outrightly reject my question, if they're so silly on, hey, this is my problem, how do I solve it? So I was keeping quiet for a couple of days and then observing what the things happening around, which also eventually I've been starting my, losing my nerves on, okay, I need to solve my problem, the team is waiting on me, and there were a lot of issues around it. And then finally one day I stepped up and asked, okay, this is how the problem, and suggest me how this could work. And then there was people suggesting, and the response was so welcoming. I remember still to date that Simon Stewart, the lead of the project, he was so kind enough to explain, very detailed manner what it happens. And I was realizing, okay, this is how the welcoming the community is. And think of me, this is someone interacting with IRC to someone, the foreigners that we used to say in back in 2009, 2010 period, where I was not even confident about my English skills, not even confident about my coding skills. And this is how literally it started. So finally, somehow I stepped in, asked my question, the problem was solved, and it was great. So from then on, rather than checking my work emails, I started checking the IRC channels, because I got so much knowledge about Selenium and other languages and other open source tools at that point in time when I was working and in fact Sahi to be one of the tools. In fact, my first day at work was to work with both Selenium and Sahi, and I told the story in one of the conferences in Bangalore as well. So along with Sahi, there was a community channel. It's also all JavaScript, and JavaScript was very new to me. And as a freshman trained in Java, getting into JavaScript was a very hard stuff for me. So and then going down the route of finding the problems, solutions to problems in the internet was again a little bit hard. And so back to my point around networking. Well, that's one of the beautiful part about open source, where I started checking the IRC chats, because they used to chat all the time, during the time when we sleep, which is their morning. So you get a whole list of transcript which you can read through and get so much about it. So I've been looking at this chat. Then I was asking, hey, you have been discussing a lot of this around this feature, and I couldn't find any information about it. And that's when someone said, welcome to open source. That's what it is. And then I realized, okay, then how do we make this information available to everyone? And then I didn't know if that was actually open source, right? So at that point in time, to me, open source was like, okay, there are a group of people who develops, but I don't know where they're coming from. Is someone is paying for them? Are we allowed to reach out to them? I don't know any clue about it. That's how I really started my journey. And once I figured out, asking this question, and I raised a question about why this isn't available for everyone, this would be useful. And I'm sure if I need this, people who are starting 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years down the line should be helpful for them as well. So that's when someone said, yeah, I think go ahead and fix it for yourself. I was like, oh yeah, that's great. Then how do I do it? So that's when, we started to know about the satisfaction, right? So it's the rewarding factor. So rewarding doesn't always mean money. So when you work in open source, yeah, you might not get money, but it's all about the satisfaction. And after I started contributing, I wasn't sure what's the impact I have been making, until someone in one of the conference a couple of years down the line, came back and say, hey, whatever you've written here or whatever done here has helped me at my workplace, and thank you so much. Yeah, and then a lot of that conversation, that's how I started. So that satisfaction, it was more like getting me in high. So I was like, yeah, this is what I should be doing. And it started with different contributions, both code wise and non-code wise. And just to give you a rundown of some of the things that I've started with Selenium. Again, I started with non-code contribution and then code contributions. And recently, like a couple of years back, I started with Appium, doing a code contribution. And then Serenity. And in fact, Selenium and Serenity is something that I've started around the same time, and started with code and then non-code along with John Smart. Back then it was actually called Thucydides, which I started for like maybe 1-2 years, and then I just stopped. And then Protractor, which is now unfortunately deprecated, but I was so happy contributing along with Google team, and the amount of knowledge that they bring in and the standards. When you're getting into a JavaScript project, you actually define, like, you wanted some sort of types, some sort of definitions, what do you have to go through, and people look at Google's coding standards, one of the good ones. So I actually got to know the Google standards when I was working with that Angular team in Protractor. And in fact, got some goodies, and I was so happy, wearing around the Protractor Angular t-shirt to wherever I went. And I was that cool kid back then. And of course, there was NG WebDriver, where there was a solution for Java-based solution for Protractor. Like if you are using Angular, but it was coming at a weird period where people have used Java, Selenium, and have invested so much time in building that framework. But just because their front end is Angular, they were actually going into JavaScript. They were, that's when we figured out, okay, why can't we write a Java-based wrapper for on top of Protractor, which will help them automate Angular applications. So Paul Hammond, one of the original developers of Selenium RC. So I worked with him and paired with him, got to know a lot of things. We, start with NG WebDriver. So with this, what I'm trying to say is, you heard my journey, like where I've started and how I felt, and what are the things that you can look forward to. But nowadays, contributing to open source is not just only about Hacktoberfest, right? So people, if I raise 4 pull requests, I get a t-shirt, I'm a cool. Yeah, I mean, getting t-shirt is always cool. I love t-shirts, and looking forward to goodie from ThoughtWorks as well, because I saw in Google form there was one question. So what I wanted to leave a message here is, don't look at contributing only on the month of October. It's not like a fasting that you want to do, right? So look at more from a sustainability perspective. Open source sustainability is one of the most commonly discussed forums, which I happened to attend. And 2 years back, like just before the COVID, I was part of a roundtable where a lot of CXOs from different fintech domains were sitting in. And imagine this is a fintech CXOs. We're talking about adopting open source and making it sustainable. So that's where the world is going, right? So companies are looking at adopting open source and making it sustainable. So that's where you can actually find people from Microsoft, Google, and all of these companies appreciate employees working on open source. And I'm glad ThoughtWorks is one among them, EPAM, and a lot of these companies. So what else is stopping you? You should, for those of you who said no, I'm gonna pick you, go ahead and contribute. And if you struggling to find ways, and that's where struggling to find ways to get to know the projects, what are the projects to contribute, and how should I really start? And that's this later part of the question. But now the really question is, how it helps, how it has helped me. I mean, one thing about open source is, well, even Elon Musk can look at what code you have written, right? Taking a dig at what he's been doing at Twitter right now. Oh my God, it's insane, right? So it's all open source. So right from Elon Musk to anyone can look at code, and then LinkedIn or whatever it is. So but the message is, use them wisely. And there is 2 different worlds of it. Someone like him can look at the code, you can get hired for a great technology, and technology skills is one of the things, right? So reading and understanding the other's code is a huge task. As I said, it's more like you getting into their brain, right? And just understanding what they've done itself is a great win. I'll actually deep dive a little later on the slides, but I just wanted to give a highlight about more than the satisfaction, what all you get. I mean, if you say, hey Manoj, whatever you said, satisfaction is good enough for me, then yeah, you're already in my door, and I'll welcome you with my open arms. But for those of you who are still thinking about what else it is, right? So collaboration, again, OSS open source is a collaborative process. You get to work with people in an asynchronous manner. Your communication improves, your collaboration improves, the accountability, the soft skills, a lot of this skills has been improved. And community. So community, everything is right from typo corrections to code, big features, everything that you can do, right? So don't restrict yourselves. The whole community will be there to back you up. And you should actually carefully choose. There is not always a good journey about open source. There has been failure stories in open source that are there in YouTube that you need to go and check it out as well. Maybe you can learn a lesson from there. But one of the other things that will help you in many ways, networking. Like, so being active in open source will yield a better job. Like, I think my job at ThoughtWorks landed in that way. And in fact, job at AppTools, for example, out in LambdaTest right now, actually happened in that way, where I didn't even apply for them. And it just happened because they've actually seen what I'm doing in the community, what I'm doing in the open source world, rather than, going through a grueling round of interviews. It actually, you're getting a stage to prove yourself, right? It's just like, the who's got talent, or the recent 100 days program like Big Boss, where people get to know what you're doing, and rather than you waiting for the opportunity, be the queue, one of them in the queue for 1,000. So don't be that, right? So, but given all these are there's still a $1 million question about why still don't people participate, right? Or rather, I would say, what is the scariest part? So in my title, I say it's not that scary, right? But then it wouldn't be fair if I don't discuss what is the scariest part, at least what I went through, in that 2-3 periods of time. I'm sure most of you, can relate to it. So when I go through the next couple of slides, it is something that I felt myself, and I'm sure if you're able to relate to it, that's great. Just put it in the chat, if you're relating to that or not. So first things first, I don't know how to code. I'm just a newbie. Maybe I just put it as I'm just a newbie, right? So as I mentioned, I was exposed to that open source world, during beginning of my career. So it was good for me to, that's where I was feeling so intimidating that, okay, will people judge? I don't actually to code. So should I really go in, poke the code and understand? Because, it's like poking the honeybee, right? So you don't know which, where the honey will come and bite you. So it's more like that. And so some of the things, again, I can't understand any of their code. So even if you are able to understand code, like say these days, the YouTube tutorials, the lot of online academies are good, so that the freshmen are understanding the code at a very good level. So they're able to do data structures, algorithms, and all of that stuff. But still, even though if you're a master at DS and algorithms, you can't master the, it's very hard to master the art of understanding others' code, right? So I don't know how many of you agree with that. Just give a quick show of hands. Or if you have been in that phase where, you've been in that situations are like, oh, this is so hard to understand, right? So just some quick tips, how I, overcome that. Like, if you're someone who's reading line by line on a big, large repository by taking one of the files, it won't work, because if it's, say, Java example, like Selenium code base, the problem is it's an object-oriented programming style. And if you're reading the code line by line, understanding, okay, I randomly pick this Java file and I read top to bottom, it might be some 100, 200 lines of code. But if you're reading line by line, it won't work. And that's how I was honestly been doing. I used to stare at the code for a long time, read line by line, and then end up wasting my time, go for a coffee, then come back, do the same thing again. So it won't used to work. It was so hard. And one of the other things that I used to do is looking at the test, understanding the intent, right? So one of the good ways to understand others' code is also to look at the tests, by which you actually can understand what is the intent of that feature, which is tying back to the feature. And knowing what it's supposed to do is always good if you actually be able to understand that, and it's a lot easier. And one of the other ways, that I've found very useful in such large code bases, especially in open source world, is to, set up a debug pointer or something, and then understand the debugging and the execution flow. And then you can step in, step over, you can do all that starts to understand, what values is coming in and how it's been getting processed and all of that. So that is one of the, key things that I've tried doing. And the other interesting factor is the refactoring. I mean, I know it's a talk for another day, another full hour, we can do the stocks. And, a lot of people already spoken about it. So there's an entire, it's an art. Refactoring is an art, and that's also one of the things. And also the other thing is about language standards, where you can actually get to know whether it's Java-based code base, you actually get to know what sort of standards it is. So there's lots more that you could learn. So what I want to do, leave you with this slide is, don't worry if you're not able to understand someone's code. Follow some of the tips that I've just gave you now, I'm sure will help you out. If not, then I can't say I'm sorry, but sometimes it takes time. So you'll have to, spend some more time understanding the code base. That's where the Slack channels are there, IRC channels are. Ask them what is a good point to start. So people will probably point you at it, rather than you looking at, Selenium example. If you are interested in contributing to Selenium, it's a huge monorepo, right? So you can actually easily get lost. So at that point in time, chat with people. And that's exactly what I was going to talk about in next slide as well. Like if you're someone who don't know where to start, again, the good point is to, be with the community. So as I mentioned, I was actually observing this channel for 2-3 days and understanding how people communicate and what they communicate. If it doesn't make sense, don't mind. So if there is a huge conversation going, don't mind interrupting. So this is what I've been thinking. I've been usually patiently waiting. So you can imagine Simon Stewart, Jim Evans, they're all been talking, and they can talk for hours about code. And I used to just stare at them and finish, so that then I can ask my question. And one day it was never ending, and then I had to come back next day and start that. So and then one day I used to talk with them during conference times, and they were like, no, why did you wait? And that's not how it works. So there's been a lot of learnings like that. So if you don't know where to start, I mean, look at the code repository. There should be a README file, and then chat with the people in the community, and I think that should really help. And one of the other things during the period, what I was thinking is, handling rejection. So what if my contribution is rejected? Will this be, a failure story of myself, where will I be getting into a situation where, okay, this is the end of it. I don't think I'm fit for, contributing code in public. I shouldn't be doing that. So I was going through a lot of it. And again, especially, don't go the route of emails, so avoid that totally. But what I was helping me is to again chat with the IRC channel and understand, how the functionality works, look at the previous commits, the history of the file, and see how it has evolved, and just get over it. And one of the other things, again, was the scariest part is, what if I write bad code that nobody likes? Yeah, even if according to you, it might be the best version of a feature, but then someone, in some part of the world will come and saying, this is, bad, this is now it should be written, you can actually optimize it. So yeah, that could be a problem, right? So you should perceive it as this thing like, okay, this is always for your good. It's more of an iterative version of your code, where it's almost like a pair programming, right? But the pair is somewhere else, and instead of one, it'll be like multiple people. So if you're already used to pair programming, then I think it should be easy. It's just that embracing different comments, right, in a positive way. But there are people still will abuse. But then that's where the projects, the open source projects, governance, and the code of conduct and all that is there, which will help you out. So back then I wasn't aware of all of these things. And even in Selenium project, I would honestly say the code of conduct and the governance, which was started very lately. So which was not then, but the community was very good. So if you're choosing a project, look for a project that has the code of conduct and the governance, where when something happens, when you're not feeling good about contributing the project, you always have someone to go and talk to, which will actually help you feel good. And then, as I said, will others evaluate me based on the code I write? Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right? From Elon Musk looking at your code to someone judging you by the code. Both things can happen. So as I said, use it wisely. And then I'm not allowed to contribute. There is a lot of legal issues. So I was working for a service-based industry, back then, where I wasn't allowed to contribute, and that was considered almost like a crime, where people like, oh yeah, you're doing something apart from the work on a different VM, and you're not supposed to do that. So then I used to spend the rest of my open source work supposed to be my late night work and all the weekend. So that's how usually it starts. So, and amongst all the scary things, so just a quick show of hands, how many of you could relate to all of this? If you're still facing, like if you're wanting to contribute open source, or if I'm sure in a couple of, okay, I can see a couple of minutes. Thank you for that. So now enough about scary things. I don't want to scare you so much, but what is the best part, right? So open source will make you a better, you can fill in whatever you want, like better person, better developer, better tester, and learning new tech, right? So a big part of open source development is a continuous learning process. Working on different projects with your challenges, exposed to newer technologies, causes you to skill in them, more feedback loops, communication skills, as I talked about it in previous slides, the coding standards, again, I spoke about it, and then communities of practice, a lot of this stuff, right, which will actually make you better at all of this stuff. And also understand that open source is not always about code, right? If you're looking at, like me, how I looked at it is, if I even don't know to contribute to code, that's fine. There is always documentation. Go check out. Always there will be some things that is missing. Even in Selenium documentation, there are still some pieces of code missing. And if you're already using Selenium, go ahead, and that's an opportunity for you to contribute. And from then on, it should be easy for you, right? And then there is always support. There's Slack channels, and there is Google groups and Stack Overflow, a lot of this. So once you start stepping into the shoes of others' problem, you can understand, what they're going through, and you might be able to solve it. And you'll actually be future ready, because who knows, you might be getting same problem sometime down the line. So it'll actually help you out. And then evangelism, right? So like what I'm doing right now as a full-time role, you could go speak about that tool. If something great, you've done something great about it. Yeah, it shouldn't be, with you, document or a notepad, talk about it, right? That's one of the good part about it. So that you get to know feedback from different people. Someone would have, looked at your talk, that you gave 4 years back, and now they could come back and say, hey, thanks for giving the talk. It really helped me in, understanding how to get started, or, whatever talk that you've been giving technical. And triaging issues is one of them, which is always easy. If you're good at, triaging issues, bucketizing them with different labels, I think that's one of the things that you can do. And of course, translations. Open source is always a global effort from community from all over the world. So I think translation is one of the good things. So you can translate to any language. If you're a expert in Hindi, Tamil, or so French, Spanish, German, you can actually translate that, and people appreciate that. And it's a most underrated way of contributing as well. Now, enough about the code-based contributions, the scariest part and the good part. And then what are the other parts apart from code? Now, how do I take the leap, right? So if you ask me, I hope this will help for you. This helped for me really as well. Even now, if I go to any new repository, this is what I do. Firstly, there is a file called README, which is actually you should read, right? People don't do that. So they end up straightly jumping into, code bases and then struggle and all of it. So read the README file, build it locally. So tools like Appium or Selenium, for example, build it locally. See if you're able to generate your own version of, say, you can name your own version, like right now 4.6.0 is released. You could say 4.0.manoj, 4.0. Whatever name you want, and you can self-boost yourself. Like, yeah, I'm able to locally develop it. And the next step I always do is look at tests. As I mentioned, it really helps you understand the intent of that feature and what the feature does. And the next thing you can do is look at issues. Of course, there will be labels. Usually all the open source project has a label called help wanted or good first issues. Ideally, those are the good ones to begin with. There is a lot of projects you can go and look at it. So directly, do all the first 3 steps, look at the issues, and then you can actually look at the PRs. You can look through the comments. Maybe someone would not have done the first 3 steps. They would have done code contribution, but then it might not be the standard that they're supposed to follow. So they will end up rewriting the code. So I've actually learned a lot of those stuff by looking at the PR. And then maybe there is a chance you could improve the tests, and then join the meetings, whatever happens, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, whatever may be in-person meetups, or, you could, whatever it is, just join them. Even if it doesn't make sense to you, first or 2 meetings, eventually you will figure out. And then you can start contributing. That's how usually, it works for me, and I hope it will work for you as well. And again, when I share this deck, you'll actually get a link to that. There is a page called First Timers Only. So what happens is when you click on this, you get this web page. I hope it's visible, where, first time contribution, goodfirstissues.com, goodfirstissue.dev. So these are nothing but a curated website where, some good people have done the job easy for us. So even if you're not, okay, I don't want to contribute to Selenium or Appium. I wanted to go into a different world. I say I wanted to be a DevOps expert. I wanted to sort of contribute to Kubernetes world. Maybe I don't know which one to start. Maybe, go to Good First Issues and see if those projects are there. And you have a freedom to select by language, by open source project, and different filters are there that you could actually do. That is something that we can actually check out for yourselves. And those are some of the things. I hope it will really help you out. And as I was saying earlier about the CXO meeting that I've been, so this is one of the things that OpenLogic has collaborated with Open Source Initiative and done a survey where more than 3,000 people responded to the survey, where it says 77% of the organizations reported increase in use of open source software, right? Which increased 36%, indicating a significant increase. So what that means is, given the digital, advent of digital transformation, given the COVID, which happened, the pandemic times, and now we are in the great resignation period, has made finding qualified open source talent into major challenge for organizations, right? So yeah, open source is one of the things where people, find it easy to, look through candidates and hire. So yeah, that's how industries are going, where they're embracing. There used to be a stage where, open source is not safe, it's not secure. so I will not end up using. So there's always a build was buy conversation. That's again for another day. I don't want to get into now, but I hope you get the crux of it. What I'm trying to say is nothing but open source is the future, where people are, even taking open source as a GTM strategy, right? So there are many companies in the testing world who has announced they have gone open source, which is essentially a GTM strategy for themselves as a business. But then the reason being why people are thinking that way is because companies like Microsoft, they said open source software is a new industry accepted model for cross-company collaboration. Like think of Selenium. We have people from LambdaTest, Sauce Labs, Microsoft, Apple, Google working all together. Or let's take ThoughtWorks' own project like Balmy. It's a healthcare plus technology in open source space. Like let's take cross company and cross industry reference. Take the 30-meter telescope project, which is part of the emerging tech, which is actually astrophysics or science, related project plus tech in open source. So which is already happening, which is something like there's a lot of things that are happening around us, which we don't realize. Okay, this is why it happens. And this is where the industry is going. So yes, what I want to leave here is with the thought that open source is the future. So take a leap about it. With that, one of the things that we have done at LambdaTest is we wanted to foster innovation through open source in testing space, where we have announced 250K grants for basically encouraging you all to contribute to open source, and hopefully you will get an innovative projects like a lot of these recipients out there are already getting the grants. Srinivasan, Sai Krishna, or your ThoughtWorks colleagues, and then we have Sri Harsha from Selenium project, Jan Molak, Mykola. And then we already got in a few, these were the first batch of people who got the open source grants, which means we will help them monthly with some donations, which will actually basically encourage them. Or if they need any other support in terms of open source, we will be there to help them. So yeah, contributing to open source can sound scary, but the rewards are enormous, right? So come join the project with Selenium or whatever project you might choose, take the leap. That's what more important. And one of the other things is open source, I always feel is an evolutionary idea towards innovation. And I hope you should take that leap. And I hope all the, past couple of slides, sharing my own journey, and then some of the tips to how to get started would have motivated to get into that first step. Right. With that, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope it was helpful. Looking forward to any questions if you have time. And yeah.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you so much. Folks, if you have questions, please post them in the polls and quizzes in the question section. Anyone?
Hey, folks, 1 second. We wanted to talk from Bangalore.
Sure.
Hey, hi Manoj, Sachin here. It was a nice talk on open source. And I just want to know, how did you manage that time when you was working on open source? You're working on project, your contribution on the open source. So like that, the question is related to the time management.
Hi, that's a really good question. Actually, I'll take that as a feedback to add it as a slide. Thank you. It's a very good question. Yeah, time management is always tough. As I said, I've lost a couple of family time, to be very honest, but the family was very accommodating with me, bearing with me in letting the time go. So what I usually do is, as I said, I started with the time phase where I was not supposed to, allowed to contribute to open source. And then, a couple of job changes, people were accommodating, they were happy to, me working on open source projects. So always, so on the first phase when I was not allowed to contribute, so the time that I used to spend is at least 2 hours every day, whether it just staring at the IRC channel or whether looking at, searching code bases. Eventually I started like that, and then ended up, doing some contributions, and that's how I started. And then when I started with companies where they allowed contributing to open sources, I spent time in, looking at the future things, how we could improve, and all of that happens. And then I took a break. So open source is not something like if you're been with the project for say a couple of years, and if you're gone, things are going up for a toss. No, it's not like that. So open source is a collaborative journey, right? So even if you're not there, things will move on, right? And that's the, it's not about, the people say bus factor. So we spoke about it in the keynote, right? So one of the things that we do at Selenium project is exactly the same. And this has been my case, like wherever I go. So I, where even if I'm away, taking time off, spending time with family, or do whatever I'm doing, so that time is being taken care. So which means I don't have the guilt of missing out something, like promising a feature but not delivering it to people. So all of that thoughts have gone. Previously I thought that's how it is, and I used to spend a lot of time overnight, weekends, and all of it, where I sacrifice and I put on weight. I used to be more than 90 kilos, but good. Right now I'm in a different stage. So that's how I used to be. So managing time is always hard, but if you have a discipline to it, I'm sure everything is possible. I hope that answered. Yeah.
Hey, Manoj Kumar here. Welcome back again. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Hey, question for you. I think more or less whoever is starting in open source, how do you tackle a scenario where you basically raise a PR, but the owner is not responding to it? Have you seen this kind of a scenario somewhere?
Eventually they will at some point. I've found many ways, just like emailing someone. But yeah, I mean, it happens. I think that's one of the ways, right? So people not responding, it could be either be the project is not maintained, or you can look at the history of the project, right? Look at the releases, look at the code version changes, see how frequent the changes are. If you're someone who's new to contributing and want to get started, I mean, probably you should pick up a project which is very active. Or maybe the other case is maybe you're using a project at your workplace where you wanted to badly contribute, and you've taken steps, effort, and you've already contributed, but the project is not responsive. When things can always get tricky, but eventually it will happen at some stage. On those cases where there has been cases where I've spent some effort, added some new features, but it was not accepted because either the maintainer has absconded, or whether it's a single man project or whatever it is. So what I've done is, of course, the changes was in my fork. So I made it my own version of it, and we deployed whatever the jar file or our npm module to our own repository in our workplace, and we started using that patch. So whenever that patch was accepted, then we started using that. So that is one of the ways that I've tackled in cases where it's a must-need feature that you want badly. It's more like the scratching your itch, right? So you've contributed, but it's not accepted. There's always a way, but eventually it will accept it, but one day. But don't wait for that one day. You can actually do your own version. That's a beautiful part about open source, where you can have your own versions, own jar files, own package. Let's put that way. So own package and use it.
Thank you.
Cool. Manoj, I think we have 2 more questions in our Q&A section. How the open source contribution is going to benefit the companies?
So yeah, I mean, it depends on what companies. If it's, say, ThoughtWorks, well, it's one of their DNA. So I would say, which means if you're contributing to open source, you're part of the family. If you're not, then you're not part of the family. So I would put that way. But if your question is very generic, saying, I'm very curious about why companies sponsor, and the reason being because back then it used to be all packaged products. Right now, all the digital tech that is being developed by companies are actually based on open source, and that is one of the reasons why people happy and willing to donate time and their employees to contribute to open source, because it's two ways. It's they are getting benefited, as well as the community gets the help as well. That's how projects like Kubernetes, Docker, you go and check out the Helm charts repository. That's how most companies do. There'll be a lot of people from Intel, Microsoft, Google, and all of these people, and they contribute because they are using it and they want to get benefited. And also eventually it will help different people who are part of different domains like fintech, retail, or whatever it is.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. We have a couple of questions coming in. So there's another question.
Sure, happy to.
Are we still looking for Selenium documentation contribution, Manoj?
Yes, we are. I see that Pooja is there. And yeah, that is always welcome. Even if it's not documentation, I'm saying there is room for documentation always. That's long story short. Yes, there is an opportunity, but there are other opportunities as well. Like you can help evangelism, you can help in conference organizing and all of that. Yes.
Cool. Thanks. I think this is the last question we will take. What are the open source projects for accessibility? I am, and I wish to dedicate an open source for PWD. Not sure about the PWD part, but yeah, it's talking about accessibility open source projects mainly.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it the public works department? No, but
Could be.
it's a bad joke, so bear with me. Yeah, so when we talk about accessibility, it's always Axe from DQ, which is open source, that has been their strategy, which I spoke about, right? So open source is the
so
yeah,
Manoj,
PWA.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, as I said, open source is becoming a GTM for many companies right now, but it has been always a strategy for many companies. Yeah, I mean, we are coming with that. So ThoughtWorks is known for acronyms. I think that is getting proven here. Keep them coming, expand them. So we can get all of them. So there is, someone said PWA, progressive web app. Someone is saying people with disabilities. Yeah. So yeah, what I was saying is, if you see Access open source, which has always been open source, and there has been commercial tools on top of Axe. So Axe pretty much works on anything that is standard HTML. I think it should work on progressive web as well. So check out Axe Core, and I think that should solve your problem.
Cool. I think we're good with the polls as well. Thank you. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
very
much
for joining. It was great having you here.
Thank you. Thank you. I always dreamt of having vodQA India-wide, and I'm so good that it is happening. And even more special that I'm being part of. Kudos to all of you, and thank you so much for the opportunity again. See you all sometime.
Sure. Thank you, Manoj.
Thank you.